Welcome to another episode of This Catholic Life. Conversations about life's ups and downs, big and small, how we deal with every situation imaginable, whatever life throws at us, but still manage to be sensible, practical and joyful. Today's show is about football and faith. Well, actually quite a lot more on the faith, I suspect, because it's a conversation with a good friend and former AFL footballer, Stephen Lawrence. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, Pete. How are you?
All right. We're renewing an old conversation, really, or one that hasn't really stopped over the years. So full disclaimer, Steve and I have been having this kind of conversation over coffee and meals for some time now. So,
and
it's
always
great
joy,
to be...
Pete.
Good. I'm glad to hear it's still that way.
Yeah.
Let's go back to well before I met you. I saw today, and I was looking up some research here that I'd done some time ago when we first talked about an interview, that you were born in South Africa and came to Australia, but you started, or at least you began your football career in Mount Gravatt. Is that right?
That's true.
Good grief. In the juniors down there?
Look, it's actually because of my dad's background in cricket and hockey. My summer and winter sports were cricket and hockey, and I played a lot of other things. But it was a friend of mine who'd come from Melbourne who said, "Why don't you play Aussie rules?" And actually, to be honest, the only impression I ever had of it was a Saturday afternoon. Turning on Channel 7 and seeing this game that looked like spaghetti, players running in every direction. I was used to games where you had one team here and one team there and offsides, like rugby and soccer and hockey and things.
Well, almost every ball sport in the world, isn't it?
Well, that's
has
true.
An offside rule.
But there looked like a lot of running and I thought, this looks like fun. So I took it up with him in his club, which was Mount Gravatt, which was across the road from my school. And it went from there.
Yeah, I mean, it did go from there. I mean, I played football in school, but that's about as far as it went, mate. Whereas you were playing in a handful of quaffle games with Morningside, I think, and then ended up playing 146 games. Is that right? Over 11 seasons with Hawthorn.
That's true. I played 12 years at Hawthorn, but one of them I didn't get to play any senior games. That was right at the beginning as a 17-year-old. But yeah, I played 146 games for the Hawks and was a great blessing to be part of that. It was really a lot of growing up, but also some really good adventures. And I was very fortunate to be there at the end of that great 80s premiership reign.
Yeah, because you played in 7 finals, including the 1991 premiership. And is it true? I heard a rumour that you were pretty close to you had some high votes in the Norm Smith for that game. Is that right?
The winner of the Norm Smith was Paul Deere, who kicked 6 goals and deserved to win it. He had a fantastic game.
He did.
It's true to say that a lot of people would say oh, you should have won the medal. And Jamie Morrissey is another one, so probably most people would say that we were the 3 best players on the ground. But certainly I was one of those in contention. Yeah, it was a great game.
Yep. I actually watched that game, not at the ground, regretfully, because I never actually got to the grand final yet. But it must have been a huge experience to be part of something so huge. I mean, very few people outside of Australia understand how big it is.
It is massive. It's actually also unusual in that it was one of 2 grand finals in the modern era that didn't get played at the MCG, last year's one being the Brisbane game because of COVID. But the previous one was while the MCG was being renovated in 1991. So we played the game at Waverley, which was our home game and probably gave us a bit of an advantage, apart from the fact that it was in Melbourne and not in Perth because we played the Eagles. But yeah, it was amazing to be in that and to be able to win a premiership. At the time, I probably expected that we would play in more because Hawthorn had played in, 9 consecutive or 9 grand finals in the course of a period of years over the 80s. And we missed 1990, but we're in the grand finals all the way from 83 till 91. Which was amazing, but a lot of those guys then retired, and so we moved into a kind of medium type range team.
Right.
So, but yeah, and I was only 22 when we won that It's actually the 30th anniversary this year. It was 30 years ago, and
there you go.
There's going to be a big reunion at the end, in July and things like that. So, there's a lot going on for that reunion. But it's funny to think it's a third of a century almost ago, and I think, gosh, I mean, I'm about to become a grandfather actually. So it's funny that I thinking, gee, I feel young still, but in fact, I'm getting old.
Oh, you're still looking young, Steve. You perhaps would. I mean, seeing the guys running around now on the ground, you think maybe I'm not quite that young. But
that's true. That's true.
When you see half of them that are out there that could have been my own kids, the age. My son's already past the age of most of those players now. So,
yeah.
Having said that, that's a good segue into the question I have about what about being a Christian or a Catholic in that world of sport, because it's not known, especially back then, it wasn't known for being kind of, people who wanted to have straight-laced sort of life. It wasn't known for harboring that kind of thing.
What's interesting, a footy club is made up of all sorts of different kind of people, actually. Obviously, usually high-achieving type people. But it's true that the media does give certain prominence to certain kinds of characters, and perhaps more so in those days than these. But yeah, there's a lot of different kind of players. And I guess the faith question was, I was very sensitive about this when I first arrived at Hawthorn, mainly because my faith was really grew in the context of my parents' separation, and that there was a period of 5 or 6 years of great conflict in my home where actually my mum was perhaps quite aggressive towards faith and my dad, and there's a whole story in all of that. And it was really, my faith was deepened in the middle of that furnace, I would say. And I came to really have a deep conviction about faith, and I had a prayer life, and I was living the sacraments and all of that. And so when I arrived at Hawthorn, I was perhaps oversensitive to how I might be received, and perhaps oversensitive to any kind of persecution or so on. So I really went out of my way to make it not known that I was a committed Catholic. But eventually, of course, you can't not do that. You can't do that. So there were a number of different moments which were testing moments for me, and called me to really, try and be authentic as a person, which, I always tried to be, didn't always succeed, but try and be authentic as a person and live up to my beliefs, but also and to try and get to Mass, for example, on a Sunday when you traveled and those sorts of things, which I always was able to do. If you really want to get to Mass in a city, you can. Well, normally putting COVID aside.
COVID notwithstanding.
Because, most cities have, a number of Masses in a day. So you can, if you want to really do it, you can. But also the question of actually testifying to my faith, or having to remove myself from situations which were, something that
morally compromised.
Exactly. Yeah. So there were some key moments like that, which I found myself facing really testing moments that I had to say, look, this is what I stand for, and going for that.
But you were talking about a reunion before, and that seems to indicate you're still good friends with these people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, what's interesting, I might tell you one of these stories, because it has a very interesting lesson that I discovered from it many years later. So it took place in 1994 when all of the players were going to a training camp at Phillip Island, 2 hours drive away, and we got in the bus, and the bus driver turned on a pornographic film. Bang, like that, as we're driving out. And I'm sitting right at the back of the bus where tall guys happen to have to sit to get some right in the middle. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't need this. It's poison, this stuff. But also at the same time, and there's all the players going, "Whoa," you could imagine in a bus. And I thought, oh Lord, help me to get out of this. I just was firstly thinking of self-preservation. I don't need this going through my mind and so forth. And I said a prayer. I said, Lord, you've got to help me here. And I looked out. I thought I'll try and just look out the window. But of course, the sound effects are going on. And anyway, I found myself standing up and walking the length of the bus. And as I walked halfway down, there was this roar that came up from the players, like, oh, because by this time there'd already been a few moments where they knew that I at least tried to stand up for what I believed and be authentic as I could. And so that Stevie is going to do something, So anyway, by the time I didn't know what I would do, and I was nervous, and my knees were knocking, and I was terrified. I was still quite young. I was in my early 20s. But I thought, what am I going to do? And I finally, as I arrived just at the bus driver, I noticed that the player sitting immediately behind him, a guy named Luke McCabe, who I knew was 17. I'm sure it was a Holy Spirit moment. And so I got this idea, and I leaned down to the bus driver's ear and I said, you have a minor on board this bus. What you're doing is illegal. Turn it off. Now, I don't even know if that was true, but I expected him to turn around and sort of, get F off or whatever.
Yeah.
But to my surprise, he just simply turned it off. Often there's opposition in these moments, but nothing. But then I had to, of course, turn around and then walk back and face my 50 teammates who were looking at me, who were quite enjoying what had been going on. And I expected the proverbial tomatoes to be thrown at me. Nothing happened. No one said a word. In fact, it was twice as far walking back as it was walking down. I sat down and the players to my side, nobody said anything. That training camp, no one referred to it. It was never referred to it. that year, the whole season, it was never once referred back to. And I was quite surprised by that. In fact, after a period of time, I thought, did I imagine that? Like, was it just a dream, or was it imagined?
Mm.
The whole of my football career, which was another 7 seasons at Hawthorn, not once was it ever referred to. In fact, it was only 18 years later that it was raised by one of my teammates. Actually, it was the funeral of Alan Jeans, Hawthorn legendary coach, and I was with Andy Collins and Darren Pritchard, two of my teammates, and Andy Collins raised it. He said to me, just out of the blue, he said, "Stevie, do you remember that time you turned the porno off on the bus?" I said, "Yes, I remember." I'm not imagining it. I'm not going mad. He said, "I need to tell you something about that." I said, "Oh, what?" He goes, "Well, as you know, I've been coaching in South Australia, in the South Australian Football League for the last few years. And I'm often asked to go and speak at schools or in business groups or, community groups or whatever, and often on the topic of leadership." And he said, "I want you to know, I always tell that story."
Wow.
I said, "Are you kidding? I've never heard it back." He said, "I reckon I've told that story to about 10,000 people." I said, "Are you serious?" Here am I thinking no one even knows about, like it's just this moment of awkwardness where everyone thinks I'm an idiot type of thing.
Yep.
And he said, "And I want you to know this, that when I say it, I say that it's the greatest act of leadership I've ever seen." That's what he said, not what I'm saying.
Mm.
And he said, "Because you knew it was the right thing to do. You knew no one really agreed with you, but you did it anyway."
Yep.
And it was really important for me to hear this back and to realize, we just never know our audience.
Yes.
You can't judge what's the right thing to do by just how many people are watching or anything like that.
And often that's because we're judging the audience based on their reaction right then, right at that moment.
Yeah.
And what you've just pointed to there is that you're not, when we act, when we say things, it's not just about that moment. It's about the impact it's going to have for a lifetime.
That's it. And so I really think that there was a grace given. I mean, you don't plan those moments. They happen in the moment.
Yes.
And the question is, how are we going to respond? And I'm not saying I've always done the right thing every time and all that. But in this moment, I was given the grace and I responded to that grace to do the right thing. I had no idea what the outcome would. I couldn't strategically think this is going to be the impact and all that. You just don't know. The question is, just do what's right.
And also the key was in that story is that as you stood with genuine concern, like most of us when we approach such a situation, you were asking for God's help. You called on the Holy Spirit's aid.
Absolutely key. Absolutely key.
Yeah. So coming from that, I mean, you've talked about friendships, and we just never know that. I mean, I was just talking last night with a friend about St. Luke. I mean, he's not St. Luke, St. Stephen, who was stoned to death outside of Jerusalem and preached this amazing homily, and they stoned him to death. And you'd think he would be thinking, what's the point? Why am I making the effort? And then one of the lines, the key line of his whole homily is used again in the book of Acts when St. Paul preaches in Athens. And it's one of the most amazing moments. I mean, imagine St. Stephen in heaven looking down going, hey, that's what I said. And St. Paul, who was there to kill him at the time when he heard it, has turned around his whole life and is now preaching the gospel in the capital of the world's so-called wisdom. It's a pretty amazing story. We just don't know what the Holy Spirit can do with the seeds that are sown through us.
On this one, Pete, I think it's something significant about the fact that they're laying their cloaks at his feet. And I remember praying about this one time, and it struck me, the whole story of Elijah and Elisha. How he handed on his cloak and therefore he got a double portion of his spirit. It's sort of a symbol. And I think in some ways, Paul received the grace through the sacrifice of Stephen. There is this whole mystery somehow of the grace of like Jesus' sacrifice, etc. It passes on this gift, and in these moments we don't know how God is operating, what the Holy Spirit is doing. We just make ourselves available, and it's a mystery. Sometimes, a lot of things we're not going to know about until heaven, but.
Often we think we want to dictate to God what our witness should be, and the feedback, because like you said, you hadn't heard anything about that act or anything about it, and you would expect it to be immediate and quite hostile, but you just never know. And in fact, I doubt we'll ever know the witness. I know my own father won't ever know how much impact he had on me. Yeah. The people I learned from in Sunday school, the people who taught me Bible studies, the people I went through a Lutheran seminary.
Yeah.
I never got a chance to tell most of them the impact they've had on me. And if I did say it, I'm not sure they would hear it Because it's a hard thing to hear when someone says that to you.
The point you raised about the importance of prayer, I think is really important, because I know that there was one year where I was concerned about the fact that I was having to play a game on Easter Sunday. And the question of whether to play on Sunday was really always a bit of a struggle for me, because, you want to give the day to the Lord and so forth. And it was my work. So it wasn't just, and Sunday games, I thought, and this one particularly, it was 1994. We had to play an Easter game on Easter Sunday. When I saw the fixture, I thought, what do I do? Should I really do something here as a committed Catholic? Should I make a stand and say, look, I'm not playing or whatever? I prayed about it. I said, Lord, show me what I should do. And I struggled with it for a few weeks. And it came to Holy Week, which was early in the season. And the coach, and I decided I would play, because I felt that the Lord was saying, well, the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Of course, put the Lord first in Mass, but still, you have other responsibilities, etc. So that was my conviction anyway. But then at the beginning of that week, beginning of Holy Week, prior to the game on the Easter Sunday, the coach said to us, this Friday being a public holiday, we're going to not train at 5, which we used to do at that time, but we're going to train at 3:00. That's 3:00 on Good Friday, It's not a movable feast. I can't just go to, the service at 4 in the morning, 6 in the morning. Whatever.
Yeah.
And I went up to him afterwards, and this is Peter Knights, who was our coach, and didn't have a religious background, so he didn't really understand. But I explained to him, I said, Knightsy, look, I really I can't really come at 3:00 because of training, because this is the moment that we believe Jesus actually died on the cross, and it's the why we have the 3:00 service. I said, I'm not trying to get out of training, but I can't come at 3. And he said, look, there are moments when you've got to make when you've got to make compromises. I said, well, maybe, but this is not one of them. And he said, okay. Okay, well, how about this? How about you come down at 1:00? You and I have a training session, and you can be gone by 2:30. I said, great. What was interesting was he and I had what I considered to be my favorite training session in my whole footy career. It was like a father-son moment. He was still a very fit guy at that stage. He was a superstar player in the 70s. But we punched each other and tackled and all that. And as it turns out, on the Easter Sunday match, we played Richmond, and I was the best on the ground. It didn't happen a lot, but it happened on this occasion. And after
thanks for that reference to Richmond there. That was,
sorry, well, they've been winning all the premierships. They can hardly be too upset. But I've been praying for the grace I said, Lord, I'll play this match, but I really pray for the grace that you give me an opportunity to give witness to your resurrection. I was specifically praying for that. Anyway, after the match, I was put on the radio in the rooms. I'm half dressed and all that. And I'm like, there's Sam Newman and a bunch of people on this radio. And there was some kind of stuff up that was happening. And they said, look, we're not quite ready to talk about the match yet, Stephen. There's a few things going on here. In the meantime, just tell us, what's news with you? And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this is an absolute half volley. I mean, I've been praying for the grace to give witness to the resurrection. It's Easter Sunday, and they asking me, what's news? Like that. And I said, well, okay. Actually, I've got great news. Today is Easter Sunday. Jesus rose from the dead. And it opened up this conversation, which, went for a few minutes before we even started to talk about the match. And it was a real grace. The Holy Spirit and it was amazing how many people told me in the months that followed that they heard that interview and they were touched by something, or they were able to tell their grandchildren or something like this. And I knew that, and I realized, I don't pray enough for these opportunities. And I know St. Paul says, pray that we can be given opportunity to give witness. It's not just human effort. It's the Lord who opens the door. So to pray and pray and pray, these are the sort of things that I've slowly learned. But I realized that was a moment really given. And it was given in the midst of a struggle. It's not easy, like there's this wrestle, and the Lord is wanting so every wrestle we have, I think we should think, rather than thinking, oh, help me get out of this, it's like, actually, I want to give you something in the middle of this, to share with others,
The moments of hardship and perhaps even conflict are quite often moments that stick in people's minds, whether or not they were for or against us in that moment. They really, like, we call teachable moments. They're the moments where the way you act, shows whether you believe what you believe and whether or not there's an integrity there. Some of the hardest moments that I thought I'd nearly stuffed up or did stuff up as a father, my kids will recite back to me as a lesson they learned, because it was that was the car accident, that's how you acted in the car accident. Oh, great. I was thinking that's the day I get a pass from being a good dad because I'm stressed out. And But
Yes,
no,
yes.
it was all about how you acted in that moment. So that's a pretty good insight.
Mm.
Perhaps we should. I mean, it's good. One really good thing about the fact that you've had all this experience is the fact that you haven't wasted. Like, it hasn't just sort of just been the benefit of your friends and those around you. You've actually spent a lot of time spreading it. So even while you're in Melbourne, you helped set up the Emmanuel community, which is an international community, but you helped set it up in Australia.
Yeah.
Can we just talk briefly about the basic tenets of the Emmanuel community?
Well, I met the Emmanuel community when I was traveling in France, and I was a 20-year-old, and I was so enamored. I felt really called immediately, especially by a strong encounter with the heart of Jesus, and also through, a beautiful experience of a mission that's deeply Catholic, wanting to really live according to the magisterium of the church, but also a call to holiness in daily life. It's made up of people of all states of life, so mostly lay people, married people, single people, and so on, men and women, but also, consecrated men and women and priests who are, part of the Emmanuel community, living as brothers and sisters, but also on mission. So it's basically a call to holiness and mission according to the charisms of adoration, compassion, and evangelization. So beginning with adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. So the Eucharist is very central, Mass and adoration, long time of personal prayer and praise. And really from that time with Jesus, with his heart, we're transformed and our heart becomes more like his. So we're loving the people, hopefully, more and more with his heart and their practical material needs. That's the compassion. But also the deepest, most profound need, which is to know him and his mercy. And that's the evangelization. So it's basically
Cool.
those three charisms is the spirit of the Emmanuel community. Yeah.
Right.
I could
Well,
go on forever.
yeah.
I'll let you. It's probably enough for
Well,
in terms of the basic.
for now, but I mean that segues nicely into the fact that you were then went back to Rome and headed the Rome School of Mission, I think, for a couple of years.
Yeah. So Annie and I were part of the beginnings of the community when we were after our honeymoon, basically. We went there and we came back and we were asked to, we had no idea what we were really doing, but we just said yes. And then we were in charge of the community in Melbourne. It has a different foundation in Sydney, but it's just one community. And we were 7 years in charge of that until we went to Rome. So a lot of that time happened while I was still playing footy, and I was working in youth ministry for Melbourne Archdiocese under Cardinal Pell as Archbishop of Melbourne. And yeah, you and I had our coffees and things. So a lot of things going on parallel. I was also studying a fair bit at the time. So, and having family, we ended up having 6 children.
And I think you were responsible for the Thursday night adoration at the cathedral there in Melbourne. Didn't you start that?
No. Well, I would say the adoration, which was a feature of the youth ministry in the latter part of it, and then the World Youth Day 2000, it grew out of that. But I would say that it was Mark Florio and Anna Snardic, who became D'Souza, and then Louisa Ashton and people like that, some of whom have had quite a lot of connection to the Emmanuel community, because we left to go to Rome straight after the World Youth Day 2000, because I went in September for 3 years there. So that kind of after World Youth Day kind of really flowed out of the grace of that, but they really did that, not me. Yeah.
And so when you came back, Cardinal Pell snapped you up to be involved in chaplaincy, university chaplaincy here in Sydney. And we touched base a number of times through there in terms of working with the young kids, and I was a speaker at a number of events there. But eventually that moved you into a reasonably high-level job in helping with World Youth Day. In particular, I think I remember, there's all sorts of fancy titles, but I think I remember you being introduced to the Pope as, this is the guy that's supposed to make World Youth Day Catholic, or something like that. And it's probably the most important part. I think there's lots of other important parts of the organisation, but I remember lots of conversations we had about that you wanted in particular. Of course I wanted, but you were the one driving it, to have every kid that came know Christ and to come away with that experience with Christ.
That was the point. That's the point of the event.
That was the point. That was the
true.
point.
Yeah. So when the Cardinal set up the World Youth Day, he got Bishop Anthony Fisher in charge and Danny Casey, and there was 2 other directors that started up at that time, just after that time. This was November 2005. One of whom was me, and the other was the Director of Operations, Ian Steigrad. And in total, there were 6 directors. I was Director of Evangelization and Catechesis, and there was another director who was in charge of liturgy, and then more practical other ones, as well as communication. So I guess of the six directors, the two that were mostly to do directly with faith were liturgy and mine, which was evangelization and catechesis. So So when the Cardinal introduced me to Pope Benedict, that's what he said. He said, "Oh, Steve was in charge of." I think he overstated it, but it's what he did say. He said, "Steve was in charge of making it a religious and spiritual event." And here am I, I actually went through a very difficult period for 3 years. And when I finished at the end of December the 21st, 2008, and the whole World Youth Day office and the post mop-up was finished, it was like having climbed Mount Everest, to be honest. It was really, really hard. But it's true. It was really, extraordinary grace. It was through all of that. I remember one time one of the guys saying to me, a guy named Steve Korekis, I don't know if you know him, but he's been to 7 or 8 World Youth Days. I've been to 6. And, he said to me, look, in the end, this was during one of my great difficulties. He said, in the end, the young people will come, the Pope will come, and the Holy Spirit will come. And it doesn't really matter what you do. It was a little bit deflating, but at the same time, quite liberating that really, ultimately it's God's work. And, we do our best, but it's really, so look, it was amazing. It was an extraordinary grace. And, I loved it.
From there, you've taken your lessons and your experiences, and also your capacity to inspire people, and you've worked as a director of identity and mission for ACU. You've worked in Catholic schools in Victoria, and that's sort of moved with all of that experience and all of your experience, especially with young people and touching their hearts. Yeah. And I've noticed that on your bio, it says that you've been studying the whole idea of masculinity and the spirituality attached to that.
Yeah.
And your current work seems to be in Catholic leadership, consulting, coaching, and formation. And I constantly, I'm very blessed to get the texts which update you on which place you're speaking, and we always pray for you.
Thank you.
How does this come about? You've obviously got a ministry there. It must have been a big decision to sort of go that way rather than sort of hold down the 9-to-5ers.
Yeah, it was a big decision. I was so I had after 3 years after the World Youth Day finished, I had 3 years as director of identity and mission at ACU, which in a different way was very difficult. The university wasn't entirely supportive of the kind of things that I was trying to do, and so it had a lot of hardship. But there were a lot of fruits that came out of it as well.
It has to be said that working in bureaucracies almost always works that way. That
correct.
No matter how good the intention is, if you're in a bureaucracy, it's always going to feel like you're pushing that stone uphill.
That's right. So, look, that was a great experience. I'm glad that I did it, and there was a lot of great things about it, and really good people that I knew. But after those 3 years, and having had this World Youth Day as well, so there's about 6 years of pretty hard yakka, to be honest. I was very bruised. And really the Lord brought me into working at Masnod College in a secondary school for boys in a wonderful environment that I loved. I thought it was only going to be for a couple of years, but it ended up being 6. But during that period, I was in my sort of mid-40s. I was thinking, I knew that something was not quite, I wasn't entirely satisfied with where I was at. As much as I loved the students and teaching, and I was director of faith and mission, like most of my roles really have been ministry or education. Those are the strands of that, but a lot of times speaking and coaching and things like that. And I went through a process of discernment, using a whole range of different things that helped me to recognize that I'm really, really want to spend a lot more time guiding and supporting Catholic leaders in their leadership roles, helping them to become more faithful and more fruitful. So inspiring and equipping them to become really great. And assuming that they really desire that. And so that's mainly through speaking and coaching and consulting, which
Right. You're also doing some stuff with your wife in marriage couples and that sort of thing?
I started actually a business, which, so this is the business side of it, which is that I've called Altum Leadership Group. So I was living in Rome during the time of John Paul II's last years. And, this Duc in Altum idea of go out into the deep, so inspired me to, really do not be afraid to be the saints of the third millennium. That kind of vision, just absolutely. I was living in close proximity to him, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And so the idea of going to the heights, because the word altum means both high and deep in Latin. So reach to the heights, but we have to go to the depths. So there's this kind of idea, this kind of apparent paradox, but in reality, it's a bit like my soul magnifies the Lord. I mean, we're called to be great, but actually to live humble service, So there's a sort of self-sacrifice that bears fruit. And so that's really what I've been trying to live. And it probably took 2 years to really take off. It's probably been the last year and a bit where it's really started to take off in a big way, I think. And where the Lord has said to me, it's actually really I actually had this whole experience of put the net on the other side, actually from that same Luke 5 passage. And because I was battling on this, there's nothing coming on that other side, and then put the net over and it's just like filled with fish. So that's been really what I've been experiencing. And I've been loving that. And I feel like I'm really in my sweet spot now doing what I'm doing. It's true though, Annie and I continue to do things through through the Emmanuel community with, like for married couples and for young people and other things that I do just out of pure love. I mean, it's not right. Only a living, it's not financial. So.
For the listeners, we will ask Steve for his web links and throw them in the show notes for this particular show so you can check it out there and get in contact with him. But what would you say, Steve, out of all of this? We've got a couple more minutes before we have to wrap it up. What would you say to a young person who's out there, wondering what to do with their life, looking, they might have some of the faith, but they don't quite know what that looks like in their life? What advice would you give them?
Pray. I think always pray, because God is real and he loves you and he knows why he created you and what your purpose is. And I think you can only discover and realize our purpose in God. We can't do it by ourselves. It's impossible. So pray that you will be led to the people and the places and the means that he wants to put on your path to help you make that to be realized. And then open up your eyes and ears and be attentive to that in your heart. Because I think, firstly, you can't do it alone. You need to be with other people of faith. And not just for faith's purpose, but for your work, for your family, for your vocation, for just the way you live your ordinary life. We can't do it alone. And if there's nothing more sure than that, I mean, the New Testament there's no examples of anyone doing it alone. We need others. And I think we live in a very, very fragmented, very, very individualized society. Yeah. And with all sorts of pressures saying, even stand back, don't even get near people. I mean, this is outrageously diabolical in my opinion. We need to go against that, and we need to say, well, there's a deeper wisdom that is available. How do I live my life in this very strange world? And, the great joy of our lives can be discovered very simply. And even if we're very far from God, even if we feel like we're totally unworthy, which we all are in one sense, it can change in a flash of a moment. It really can change. Yes. And all we need to do is just turn our eyes to him. We can be like Peter walking on the water and then sink because we take notice of the waves and the wind and life's problems, of course, and they're always going to be there. But the reason why Peter was able to walk on the water was because his eyes were on Jesus, but he took them off, and that's when he sank. So we just have to call out, Lord, save me, and he will. Yep. But keep our eyes on him. I think that's the number one priority, eyes on Jesus. And maybe for people who really are worried about the state of the world and even the state of the church and all that, I would say, I think St. John is a key person for us at the moment. What did he do in the time of Holy Week, He didn't jump up and down and make it, don't do this, no, that's all wrong and all that. He just stayed very close to the heart of Jesus at the Last Supper and then at the cross. He was the one who didn't die a martyrdom because he already kind of lived it because he was faithful. But what gave him the key? What was the key that allowed him to be faithful? Resting on the heart of Jesus. And I think he's the one attentive to the movement of the heart of Jesus. So that means we need to pray and come close, listen to the word of God and trust that the Lord will bring us through the resurrection on the other side.
And if your story that we've just heard is to teach us anything, it is that God works through the times we aren't necessarily expecting him to, often the times that we think are actually the hard bits or that may be barriers and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And that, one thing I'd add from my own experience is that building community is hard when you're trying to get what you want from other people. It's much easier when we see a need in someone else and respond to that need, because that's what ends up uniting us to, we can come to someone in their need and love them. We probably need to wrap it up. We've had an excellent conversation. I hate, as usual, we always hated finishing lunches. But we have to stop for this week's podcast. If today's discussion got you thinking or arguing with your podcast device, let us know. You can check out Steve's ministries in the links in the show notes. And you can check out future shows and past shows of This Catholic Life at thiscatholiclife.com.au. Check us out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, and all the usual social medias. Write us a review on iTunes. This is a uniquely Australian Catholic podcast. We reckon that's worth shouting about. So, we'll be back next week, but that's all for now. Thank you for listening to This Catholic Life.